When one day ends and before a new one begins, between midnight and the first second after, there exists the enigmatic hour, the impossible time when all is possible. Hello and welcome, traveler. I will be your guide tonight as we explore the mysterious and the macabre. Histories both strange and forgotten, and weave a tangled web between fact and fiction.
So I'm Alexander.
Oh, and I'm Karolina.
And welcome again. This is our second podcast, and this is going to be in honor of the season. We're going to be talking into some Samhain traditions and Halloween. But to get us started, we have another piece of original fiction. This is a short number called My Neighbour Small. My neighbour Small is a strange and squirrely fellow. I often see him puttering around his garden, muttering to his plants and kicking the weeds. There's always been something off about him. He exudes a vaguely creepy vibe, and the comments he makes often come from nowhere. I'm never one to gossip. My friends and I have often discussed the peculiar behaviors of Mr. Small when they come around for a glass of wine or admire the beautiful flowers in my garden. Mrs. Small often used to join us on these occasions, but none of us have seen her in some time. We, of course, would never presume or suggest that anything untoward has befallen her. It's hard not to notice that Mr. Small has grown increasingly erratic since the last time any of us saw his wife. She was one of the most beautiful, charming, and passionate women I've ever met. They were childhood sweethearts who never really been with anyone else. As the head of the local gardening society, I try not to judge people too harshly, but it's hard not to consider one's garden a reflection of the person. My lawn, for instance, is finely manicured, with not a weed to be seen. My flowers are the tallest and straightest in the neighborhood. Why are the rose bushes I recently planted are already showing signs of being prize winners? The trick, of course, is good quality fertilizer and lots of love and attention. Now, the Smalls' garden is always unkempt. It's clear they take no pride in it, which is probably why he watches me so intently when he thinks I'm not looking. I can feel him staring at me through the windows of his house. It's nothing more than envy, not something I'd ever stoop so low as to feel. Poor Mrs. Small must have been battled with his paranormal every day, I'm certain of it. That's why she preferred my company to his. Those little looks she gave me when we were together, the times our hands accidentally touched, it was so obvious that she was trying to tell me, even if she was too afraid to do so. I think Mr. Small must have suspected that she had feelings toward me. I'd often see them looking towards my house through my window blinds. Mrs. Small was my dearest friend, so I kept a vigilant watch over her. It was always surprising how much we had in common and how many accidental encounters often befell us. The number of times I'd run into them at the grocery store or her at one of the many charity events she organized could only be fate's way of bringing us together. When the universe is giving you such a sign, she herself has made her feelings plain for all to be seen, it would have been a crime not to act. Mr. Small was out of town that weekend, his dutiful wife home alone and no doubt in need of friendship. I happened to have a number of chilled bottles of her favorite white wine on hand when I went to visit. The wine flowed copiously that night. She had a wistful, wanting look in her eyes and succulent red lips. I couldn't help but kiss her with all our pent-up passion. It must have been the wrong moment. She was surprised and startled. She pulled back in what some who didn't know her as well as I did would call shock and disgust. What happened next was hardly my fault, but somehow she ended up struck repeatedly in the head with a bottle. There was hardly any blood at all. Normally, there's so much more. I wrapped her tightly in a garbage bag, and under the cover of the moonless night, I buried Mrs. Small in my garden. I planted a rose bush over her, where she lay, so that everyone can enjoy her beauty as much as I do. Mr. Small must suspect his increasingly erratic behavior could mean nothing else. Those sideways glances, the way he refuses to meet my gaze, something will have to be done about him. On the next moonless night, I'll have to pay him a visit. But he's not suitable for flowers. There's always other things to grow in a garden.
Ew, that's horribly creepy.
I went for a horribly creepy vibe.
Yeah, I think Mr. Small better strike first.
Yeah.
His days are numbered.
I tried to get a nice little turn there where it gets progressively creepy and more stalkerish as it goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this neighbor is is definitely not one that I would like to have.
No, not at all.
I'm going to steer clear of people with lovely gardens.
As you should. We can't trust a person with a good garden, right? That's how it works.
What's like the people that you have that don't like anybody walking on their grass? It's grass. There's something very suspicious about somebody who won't let people walk on their grass.
Well, have you ever been to Cambridge?
Perhaps.
So at Cambridge, it's famous for having lots of lawns and green space that only fellows are allowed to walk on.
Oh, wait a second. Okay. Not Cambridge, Ontario.
No, sorry. Cambridge the University. Sorry.
I see. No, then I have not.
Okay, yeah. So Cambridge University has lots of lovely green space that only fellows are allowed to walk on. Regular students and common folk are not allowed to step upon the lawn and the garden.
Oh, wow. Okay, the privilege to be able to step on that lawn.
Yeah, so they're lucky to be even allowed on the grounds, you know?
Right.
Being the season, we're going to start off by talking about Samhain, or to pronounce it more correctly, Samhain. Now...
Wait, Samhain?
Samhain is the...
Samhain.
Samhain.
I was never... I wasn't ever sure how to pronounce that, so I chose not to. So
Samhain, yeah.
Okay, that's the proper
I checked many YouTube videos on how to pronounce it.
Perfect.
I'm going to be honest, from now on, I may completely butcher some of the Irish and Celtic words that are going to come up, but I will try my best.
Sorry, Irish people.
I'm sorry, Irish people.
He's a Brit.
Oh, yeah. Don't hold it against us. Still likes, share, and subscribe to the podcast. So Samhain was one of the big 4 festivals of the Celtic calendar that's celebrated around November 1st. The other 3 were Imbolc on February 1st, Beltane on May 1st, and Lughnasadh on August 1st. And we know that these are some of the oldest and most important festivals to the Celts. For instance, there are 2 Neolithic burial mounds that we've discovered. One is called the Mound of Hostages, and another Cairn L at Silva Nicola, which are both a kind of tomb called a passage tomb. And what happens is twice a year, the sun hits just the right moment to illuminate the hallway that is the passage tomb. They're large circular mounds with carved stone pillars on either side and a large open passage. And on Imbolc and Samhain, the sun hits just the right zenith so that it can actually illuminate the whole passage, as a gateway to the other world. One of the other interesting things important to note about the Celtic practices is, that I thought was quite interesting, is that they mark the day as starting and ending at sundown versus sunrise, which we normally do. So, based on our calendar, then November 1st would have started on October 31st Eve. So, sundown October 31st is when Samhain begins.
Okay. So that would be their November 1st, or...
Yeah, November 1st would be, I guess, this Saturday at sundown.
Whenever the sun... Okay. That's cool.
This is also probably where the idea that Samhain is the Celtic New Year comes from as well. There isn't really any hard evidence of this, but the idea of it being New Year's comes from 2 19th century scholars, Sir John Rhys and Sir James Fraser, who wrote about it in their books on folklore. There's also another thing that supports this argument in that, so there's a thing called the Colony calendar, which was found in Colony, France in 1897. Now this is a kind of peg calendar, and it dates back to like the 3rd century in Gaul. And it shows a 5-year cycle of Celtic years. And we know that from this calendar, the first month of the calendar is Salmoneus. And then there's some scholarly debate whether Salmoneus means summer or whether it means Samhain.
Sounds a little bit like Samhain.
Yeah, so it could be either. I guess it's whether it begins at the beginning of summer or beginning at the beginning of winter.
Right. Would you like to begin your year nice and warm and toasty and happy with lots of light? Or would you like to begin your year all somber in the darkest time?
Yeah.
I wonder. Celts.
Yeah, we'll never really know unless we find more archaeological evidence, unfortunately. The other thing that's interesting about their calendar, they have 12 months plus 2 extra months. So not every year has the same number of months. There are 2 extra months that appear throughout the 5-year cycle. So some years will have 13 months in them. So, like maybe 2020 has an extra month in it.
Oh God, no, please no.
It certainly feels like it's got an extra month in it.
No, I think we're on month 98 now. But yes, please no more. Okay, but I get it. Okay, so
yeah,
if within that 5-year cycle, 1 year will have 13, 14 months, or
like 12 to 13 months, I guess, depending on the year. Their months are also divided into 2 halves. The first half is 15 days long. And the second half is either 14 or 15 days long. And the word according to the calendar that breaks up these words, they think it means renewal or rebirth, that sort of thing. So which some scholars think means it signified the new moon.
Okay.
I'm a little iffy on that part because to me, like, if their day start and ends at sundown, I would have thought that their months would have followed a similar suit. So the month would have gone new moon, the middle of the month would be the full moon, and then go into the new moon. It would be the end.
Right. So your months would actually follow the lunar cycle rather than follow some sort of like arbitrary.
So their calendar is definitely a solar lunar calendar. So there's a special kind of calendar that's a mix of solar and lunar. Like ours is solar lunar, similar. Mm-hmm. Like the reason we have our lengths of months are partly driven off the lunar cycle, and it's all to fit. So that's also why they have the extra couple of months to try and get things back instead of having leap years. They have throw an extra month in their works.
I like that. If that month is in the summer, I love it. I'm all down for that.
Yeah, it's an extra month of rent.
I know that's not the way that works. It's a month of what?
Extra month to pay rent. Extra month.
Oh yeah, never mind.
It's the same number of days,
like
though, really, isn't it?
No, because you pay monthly. I don't know.
Yeah.
13 months.
I suppose if you get paid annually, if you have an annual salary, do you get paid more on long years than you would on short years? Or is it you just get less per month?
I think you would just get less per month if it's an annual salary. Because
that doesn't seem fair, though. You
work
an extra 30 days that month.
Right, but I mean, if you get paid every 2 weeks, then there are 2 months out of the year where you get 3 pays, and every other month it's only 2 pays, which is very unfair. I feel like it should be more.
Yeah. So, yeah, good point. I suppose, you'd have to have some accommodation for that, yeah. Now, most of the surviving Celtic traditions come from Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man these days, as well as Cornwall and Brittany and a few other places. But at one point, the Celts were the preeminent culture in Central Europe. By 1200 BC, they were everywhere. In fact, the oldest site we've found of Celtic origin is in Austria.
Really?
Yeah, the oldest known Celtic site is actually in Austria.
Okay, I had no idea. This is fascinating.
Yeah, and we know that by 1200 BC they had spread, to Gaul and down into Iberia, to the Brittanies, and we know for certain that by the time Julius Caesar arrived in Britain in the 1st century BC, they were one of the main clans in Britain. And we know that they're not the only ones in Britain because there's a Greek navigator and scholar who went up to Britain during his travels, and he makes a clear distinction between Britons and Celts and the other tribes there.
Do we know if that is just his distinction, or if there are any writings, I guess, from Celtic writings, perhaps?
Well,
I'm not sure if they had a...
We do know they had some language and carving system. Again, I haven't looked into it 100%. We know that it's like the calendar we found is partly written in Latin, because by the time the Romans invaded Gaul and started conquering the things, the Celtic language is pretty much leaves Europe. It gets driven out through a process called synchronism, where like the Celtic culture mixes with the Roman culture, and they start speaking what's called vulgar Latin. Not the fine Latin of court, but the everyday Latin.
The everyday mix, yes.
Yeah, but the Celts had a huge impact on Roman military strategy. The Roman cavalry and horsemanship practices, they all got from the Celts. They incorporated into the system. They started using the Sparta, which is the Celtic cavalry weapon. And even they absorbed the Celtic god of horses, Epona, into the Roman pantheon, So there was a lot of intermixing of the Celtic people. The only place that really the language survived, it's called like the insular Celts, was in like Britain, mainly in Scotland and Ireland, where Roman reach never went. The Romans never really made that far into Scotland or Ireland,
They certainly tried.
They did try. Yeah, so when looking into a lot of the Celtic stuff in the Samhain, one of the challenges, a lot of it has been absorbed and reimagined through neo-paganism, the Celtic Restoration movement, and Wicca. We might try and touch on some of these practices and beliefs that, have been sort of taken inspiration from their Celtic roots, but we'll try and focus more on what we could piece together from the old customs and mythology. So Samhain marked the end of the harvest season. It was the start of the long night. Winter is upon you. It's the last of the crops have been harvested. Cattle have been brought in from the summer pastures into the winter pastures. And it was a time when the veil between the worlds, this world and the other world, was at its thinnest. The Aishi, the dwellers of the mound who lived beneath the earth, would come out. The Tuath Dodana would leave Tir Nagog and Imric Albic to travel the earth. Those are two lands in the Celtic otherworld. The first meaning the land of youth, and the other meaning the Isle of Apple Trees.
Ooh, that one sounds pleasant.
Well, apples actually play a big part in Celtic folklore. There's like all sorts of myths about them. They're one of the sacred trees. In fact, there's some of the apples are considered to grant immortality. There's even stories of a legendary king who was imprisoned within an apple that was eaten by a salmon that only resurfaced once every 7 years. And in fact, druids would make their wands from either apple wood or from yew wood.
Okay, that's very interesting. I could see, I guess maybe that influence in the Bible with Adam and Eve apple, right?
Well, yeah, apples play a lot. You can see some of the borrowings and some influence from some of the Greek mythology, because apples were probably brought to Ireland from the Romans and all of that. They brought them that far north. And there's one story I was reading about talks about a silver branch with 3 golden apples that play beautiful music when tapped, and the apple of immortality and the golden apple, that's, reference that in Greek mythology as well, Mm-hmm. So at the Festival of Samhain, according to that surviving calendar, it seems to imply it lasted for 3 days. So not just one night and it's over, but it was a big 3-day festival.
So basically October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd.
Yeah.
So what we know today as Halloween, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day.
Yeah, that's when you celebrated Samhain.
Mm-hmm.
It was a time of feasting and revelry, great bonfires lit to ward off the darkness and dispel negative emotions. In fact, that's something you have at all 4 of the big festivals. They all have bonfires. Bonfires seem to have a big renewal and spiritual cleansing aspect in Celtic folklore.
Right, and also it was autumn and very cold.
It would have been very cold, and in fact the bonfire stuff still survives to this day. There's still huge Samhain bonfires and other similar nights happening in Ireland and Scotland, and a few weeks later we have it in England. We have Bonfire Night, which is a little different,
Is that on November 5th?
It's the 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November? So So the druids would hold rites and rituals to honor the dead and celebrate their harvest. Rich people would burn cattle bones as a sign of their wealth, cattle being one of the clearest measurements of a person's prosperity in early cultures. It's the time when farmers would pick their animals to slaughter that winter from their herds and flocks. They'd be like, okay, sorry, chubby rabbit, you're the one we're going to have for dinner this month,
Sorry, Bill.
One of the potential customs, I'm not 100% sure if it happened or not, was the relighting of the hearth fires. So there's some stories of them basically dousing all the fires within the home, and then you would take a torch from the communal bonfire that had been blessed by the local druid to relight your fires in your home for that winter, as a sign of rebirth and renewal. We know that within households there was lots of gathering. They practiced all sorts of ritual magics. There was a lot of divinations, and for instance, one of the things that households would practice is they would hang a pair of hazelnuts by the fireplace to see if a couple was a good match. Or another communal gathering was they would place apples in a tub of water or dangled from string, and a person would bob for the apple to see if they would be the next to marry. It's also a time when the Druids also practiced a form of pyromancy as well. They would supposedly read the future and the portents for the coming winter and the next year through the fire and the sacred flames. They would tell the community's fate.
Well, that would have been a cool job. Okay. I've always wondered, what kind of occupation I would want back in the day if I lived in, Ireland or different places. But I think I would definitely want to be a druid.
Well,
Set things on fire and read people's futures.
I think, you could have qualified to be a druid. You could have been a warrior woman. There are plenty of cases of Celtic warrior women fighting on the battlefields.
Which we might talk about next week.
The Celts were also very warlike people, so there was a lot of conflict, but Samhain was also a traditional time of truces and ending of hostilities. So it's war, it's winter. There's one of the stories from Celtic folklore, for instance, is talking about a Samhain cattle rustling. Because normally you rustle cattle in the summer, in the spring. It was so unheard of doing it in the winter that the people of Ulster were completely taken unaware, So you can see, all these, time to declare peace. There's also a couple of stories of human sacrifice, but there doesn't seem to be any real evidence of this, There's, the Romans, like Julius Caesar, talked about the Celts being so violent and ruthless, they would kill anyone, But he was at war at the time, so you got to take that with a grain of salt.
Propaganda. Definitely Roman propaganda.
But one thing we do know for certain from the archaeological evidence, an overwhelming amount, is the Celts liked to collect human heads. They were big into beheadings. They would behead their enemies, parade their heads on spikes, This is probably where, the idea of placing the turnip lantern on a spike. I mean, we talked about this in last week's episode, when they still do it in Portugal, So probably one of the things they probably did here was, place ritualized heads on pikes to ward off evil and show their success.
So do we know what implement they used for this? Was it axes?
Well, they used a lot of spears. So they would have used spears and swords and axes.
To decapitate. Specifically.
To decapitate, I don't know what specifically they would have used. Some sort of blade, probably an axe or a sword.
I feel like if we could go back in the future and just get them that guillotine, it would have just made their day.
Yeah, well, they seem to, a lot of the mythology and folklore, spears seem to be the big weapon in Celtic mythology. A lot of their famous weapons and people all use spears. So... But obviously you can't decapitate someone with a spear. So you need a good decapitation blade.
Well, you could. It would just take longer than probably what...
Yeah, it would be very inefficient, just
Pokey, pokey, pokey.
Yeah. We also know they placed carved turnip lanterns around the windsill and to ward off the restless souls of the dead unable to reach the afterlife during the Samhain, to keep away the malevolent versions of the Aishi. During the old times, people would avoid traveling at night during the Samhain. They'd make sure they stay close to home and avoid the darkness. If they were forced to travel, they would make sure that they carried salt or cold iron in their hands to ward off spirits, People would even leave out, though, offerings to the Eishi. It was sort of to get the blessing and boon so that their family would survive the winter. They would leave out like a saucer of milk or cream or a little flagon of beer and a bit of the harvest, to get the benefit of the, good spirits,
Cookies and milk.
Kind of like cookies and milk, but that's more of a Germanic tradition. Yule is obviously from Norse mythology.
Figured.
Yeah. And by the 16th century, we know that one of the things that had been incorporated into Samhain was a custom called guising or mumming. We're not really sure when this started, but we know it had reached popularity by the 16th century. Maybe it's because, the night was less scary by then. The Eishi, maybe they weren't getting so involved in human life. They weren't causing terrible tricks and pranks on you. They weren't killing your cattle and stealing your wives during the night, But so people would go. They would dress up in costumes and they would go house to house reciting Bible verses or songs in exchange for gifts of food. As more, this probably, they would wear masks and conceal their identity. This probably harkens back to some of the old Druidic customs. So it's probably during the older Samhain festivals, the Druids would have worn masks and then other people would have worn masks. We know they didn't just wear masks. It was also like they covered their faces with veils or they would paint their faces. They even covered their faces with ashes from the bonfire, which seems to have been more of probably one of those ancient Druidic customs, like where the sacred ashes were seen as cleansing and warding off evil. So you could quite easily imagine like an ancient Samhain festival where people would be blessed. The Druid would come person to person in the village and coat their face in ashes to, ward off death for that winter. And it's not dissimilar to a Catholic tradition, if you will, that happens called Ash Wednesday, where the priest goes and blesses their congregation with the ashes from the palm and, makes the cross. And in fact, Ash Wednesday, it came about from Pope Gregory I. He was the one who introduced it. And it's, very similar to the old Celtic tradition of using ashes to coat your face as a blessing. So it's not implausible that he got it from the Celtic people as a way of Christianizing some of their beliefs. And we know that, for instance, only a few years after Gregory I died, Boniface III created the holiday of All Saints' Day. Now, All Saints' Day was originally May 13th.
Oh.
And that's when it was originally celebrated. But about 150 years after that, Gregory III moved it to November 1st. And that's probably more than anything to try and absorb that pagan custom, to help better Christianize, the Celtic followers of Christianity, because they're still very much they're Christian, but they're practicing their old beliefs. So to try and take those old beliefs and absorb them into Christianity, as it very much did back then. It was like absorbing cultures that it was influencing. In fact, one of the other big festivals, Imbolc, celebrates the goddess Bridget, who is associated with spring, fertility, healing, pottery, and smithing. But her festival is now St. Bridget's Day, and she's considered a Christian saint and no longer a pagan god.
When is that one again? That one is in the spring?
That is in the spring. Imbolc is, if I remember correctly, in February 1st.
Oh, right before spring.
Yeah. So you would St. Bridget's Day. You'd have little wicker people, and women would walk through the streets and celebrate the coming of spring, and
So living in Canada, as we do, I'm just trying to imagine the women walking through the street on February 1st, welcoming spring in minus 25.
Little wicker men with them?
With little wicker men. I could be burning them for warmth.
I know. I'm sure if you go to the right part of town during the winter, you can see all sorts of inappropriate outfits.
Oh, yes.
So you might be asking yourself, what about these malevolent spirits in Eishi that you mentioned before? I can't leave without talking about a few of them, right? I gotta mention a few of the good ones. So, one such creature you might account on Samhain was a being known as the Dullahan, the headless rider upon a black horse. They carry a whip made from human spine, they carry their decaying head in their hands, a mouth split across the head in a gruesome grin. The Doulahan are also known to ride upon horse-drawn carriages made from coffins and tombstones, the carriage's way lit by burning candles with skulls that adorned it. It is said that no gate can stop the Doulahan in its path, the rider silent for the entire journey from dusk until dawn, speaking only once to say the name of the soul it has come to collect. Only an object made of gold or the dawn's light can drive back the Doulahan. Another one is the Banshee. These are tall, ghastly-faced women, her eyes haggard and bloodshot. She dresses in a grey cloak or a green dress. The Banshee mourns wailfully and bitterly, crying in warning of imminent death to the one close to those who hear its cries. It's even said that when someone of great importance is going to die, then many Banshee will gather to weep and wail, their cries loud enough to break glass. And a third and final one for this evening is Lady Gwen and her black pig that lead the wild hunt. A host of fairies and spectral hounds, souls of the dead that come to ravage across the night sky, an ominous portent of mass death to follow. To see the wild hunt is to learn of a coming plague or war, and those unfortunate enough to be caught by the wild hunt have their souls and body ripped away from this world, dragged back to the other when the host returns from whence they came.
I did see her, I think, maybe about November of last year.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Coming plague, eh?
Should have warned us.
Should have warned you. I'm sorry, it's my fault.
It's all your fault, yeah. 2020, 100% you.
Totally my fault.
Yeah, so that's what I have for Samhain. So bolt your doors, light your turnip lamps to ward off the darkness. Lest the night creatures prey upon you this Samhain.
Okay, so this tradition turned into what we know as Halloween in North America and likely England, potentially maybe Ireland, and a few other places in the world, right? So I know we were talking last week about All Saints Day and All Souls Day, and I hail from Eastern Europe. So in our family, like in my family's tradition, I mentioned last week that we did not traditionally celebrate Halloween or Samhain. My apologies.
It's okay.
So what we celebrated was Eastern European Roman Catholic tradition. Was All Saints Day and a little bit All Souls Day. So we went to the cemetery, or my family still does this back in Poland. They go to the cemetery and on November 1st and November 2nd, and they light candles for the dead, and it's a huge celebration of the dead. So so the cemeteries are usually full. And speaking to one of my grandmothers this past week, she went about a week ago so that she could avoid the crowds because there's a pandemic. So so there are people who celebrate Halloween or this time a little bit differently. So that got me thinking, how do people celebrate Halloween outside of North America and Western traditions? So in Japan, they have absorbed a lot of the North American traditions in terms of celebrating Halloween. But they celebrate it a little bit differently. So in Japan, they have amazing street parties.
Okay.
So house parties are not as common in Japan, largely because they have much smaller living spaces. And also, culturally, it is not, they value privacy.
Okay.
So walking around to people's homes and knocking on their doors and disturbing them is not something that that they see as being comfortable with. So these street parties are outside of the house and down a populated street somewhere. And they're quite large spectacles, apparently. So it's almost impossible to get into a restaurant or a bar or a club or any popular Halloween spot in Japan without an advance reservation or ticket. So usually, like, if you can't get into one of these places, you go to a street festival. And I assume that that's probably not happening this year. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, probably not.
I feel like Halloween is different all over the globe. But
yeah, no trick-or-treating for kids.
Definitely no trick-or-treating, which also doesn't happen in Japan. So
No.
regularly, children do not trick-or-treat. There's more of a planned trick-or-treating event. So they're more organized, collaborative events.
So like a Pokemon Go trick-or-treat app?
Go to the... Oh! I hope all of you Americans go vote next week.
Or have already voted.
Or have already voted, yes. But yes, sort of a, not an app, but children usually walk around organized collaborative events, little parties, community parties, to go pick up some candy and some treats. So they don't really knock on neighbors' doors because that's not seen as culturally appropriate in Japan. So another thing that kids do is called a stamp rally. So children are given a map and a stamp card at a special trick-or-treating event, and they must go to designated points to collect candy or to collect stamps, and then they exchange the stamp card for candy or some sort of treat at the end.
Okay.
So a lot of public spaces apparently participate in this. So train stations, any sort of like big public place, public parks.
Almost sounds like a scavenger hunt kind of thing.
It does, yeah. I wasn't able to figure out if children actually dress up in costumes while they're doing this. But I know that people who go to the street parties and to the bars and clubs definitely do dress up in costumes.
Yeah, I think dressing up as a costume is like either do it when you're really little or then when you're older and you become sexy blank.
I feel like that's more of a North American thing. Because apparently in Japan they're more fun rather than scary.
Okay.
Or I'm not sure how much they do the sexy nurse or the sexy envelope.
Oh yeah, that sexy envelope costume.
Yes.
I'd like to open her. Oh, sorry.
You can make anything sexy. But in Japan it's more of the cosplay. So I guess there's a little bit of the sexy component to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But have you ever wondered what Halloween is like in Russia?
I have.
You have. Me too. Even though I hail from a place that is close to Russia, their traditions are very different.
In Soviet Russia, government go house to house and check on you.
Yes. Well, that sounds a lot more fun than it was. I'm sure. So, like in Japan, Russia has also kind of taken the North American Halloween tradition and made it theirs. So, after the fall of the Soviet Empire in the 90s, Halloween actually started to kind of come into mainstream Russia. So the focus today with costumes in Russia is more on the scary side rather than the fun side like in Japan. So a lot of scary makeup and costumes and trying to be like the ghoul and like scare other people rather than to have a sexy envelope. You'd have a terrifying envelope.
It's the student loan envelope.
Oh god, that's the most terrifying one ever. So they have organized events for children, but adults get to go to clubs and pubs and such, which have their own Halloween programs. Usually decorate and have special scary menus and fire shows and costume contests. So very similar to, I guess, what adults do here in North America.
Yeah.
The Russians do have a traditional holiday called Kolyada.
Oh, yeah?
I'm probably mispronouncing that, so I apologize to all the Russians, but a Kolyada is similar to Halloween. It's a tradition that was practiced on the night of January 6th, before Orthodox Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
So the Russians are on a different calendar, so they celebrate their Christmas on January 6th. So on January 5th, people did not sleep. They usually went from home to home, sang carols, and received treats in return. They would also dress up. So young people would wear sheepskin jackets turned inside out and masks imitating various animals such as bears and sheep and goats, which actually would probably look quite terrifying.
Sounds sort of like Krampus night.
It does, yes. So this tradition is gradually being revived in rural areas where people go sing songs, wear costumes, and go to their neighbors, relatives, and friends for all kinds of different treats.
Okay.
So very similar to like a trick-or-treat event, but you don't try to terrify your neighbors. So I was also curious what people did in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So I found in Kenya, for example, Halloween is actually practiced there. But the event is marked by wearing flamboyant costumes, like a face mask being the most popular. The costumes there are traditionally modeled after supernatural figures, such as devils and skeletons and witches, vampires and monsters and ghosts. While children do not trick or treat, adults attend parties and enjoy horror movies. So what I'm getting from most of this, from these 3 different places, is that adults have all the fun.
Yeah, the kids get some treats and go to some street parties. The adults are eating good food, wining and dining, watching horror films, and
drinking alcohol on the street.
The old days, eh?
Yes.
So what have you been missing the most about not holidays, Halloween?
I think I'm not seeing as many decorations this year, unfortunately. I remember even just driving down the street, walking down the street, you would see way more Halloween decorations. Whereas I see them in the stores, I don't think that people have put them up in their homes, since trick-or-treating is not going to be something that children do this year. So I think...
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't feel that festive Halloween season and spirit, you know. I think that's also part, you know, because like some of the big things we used to do every Halloween have been cancelled, you know, like the film festivals and all the horror movies we used to watch, you know.
Yes, we used to go to, there's a film festival in Toronto called After Dark, Horror Film Festival, which is wonderful. And it usually happens, I think, end of September, beginning of October.
Yeah, only that for that time.
Part of fall. Yeah.
And they have like 2 or 3 horror movies every day for 2 weeks, and some are good and some are bad. I guess it's not just horror anymore, it's like sci-fi and pop culture and
yeah, and some dark comedies, and usually you can find a few shows a few movies that you enjoy. There's some shorts as well. But that's usually how we mark the beginning of the spooky season.
Yeah, that's normally the start of our Halloween calendar. It marks the end of summer and the start of the slow descent into winter.
The slow decay being death.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yes. So unfortunately, that's something that I'm missing for sure. The decorations, and I guess just home parties and people getting into the spirit. And sometimes we do our friends historically have gotten together for horror movie nights.
Yep.
Not that we don't do this throughout the year, but we try to really focus on it around Halloween.
Yeah, we really put in our effort at Halloween, you know. We all try and bring at least one horror film no one's seen yet, you know. Sometimes they're excellent and sometimes they're terrible.
But it's still a fun time.
Yeah, it's fun. You get together with friends and, you know, we'd probably go to at least one Halloween party, you know, dress up, go to the bar, you know, something, you know.
There's usually a street festival here as well.
Yeah.
if you live in Toronto, around on Church Street, there's usually a huge Halloween festival. I lived there for a time, and it was a wonderful living there, and just going out and walking down the street and having like tons of people in costume just outside of my house.
Yeah, they do.
It's not sarcastic. It's actually quite fun.
Yeah, I guess that's, one of the things that, North America Halloween has always been about is like the end of summer, So it's like the getting together with family and friends, to...
Yeah, and I wonder if it's, we didn't really have a full celebratory summer this year, so I'm wondering if maybe we're just not ready for fall, and...
Yeah, I guess, just... More inside time.
More inside time. That's right. What are you guys missing this Halloween season? Or are you missing anything? Are you able to celebrate the way that you usually do? Or do you not celebrate?
Yeah. And if you can't celebrate this year, what would you want to be doing then? What would your big Halloween parties or festivities were?
Yes. And are you dressing up? And if you're dressing up, please tell us how.
Yeah. Oh, and did you carve a pumpkin this year? Or do you not carve pumpkins? We did pumpkin carving. That was fun.
Yes, we did do pumpkin carving. And I actually, one of the things that I saw at my local grocery store was that we did sell out of pumpkins there.
Ooh.
And they brought in a new batch. So I think people are engaging in pumpkin carving this year. No turnips, but pumpkins.
I keep meaning to try cooking with pumpkin. I've yet to do it.
Me too. I do have 2 pie pumpkins.
Okay.
That I plan on carving and seeing if the seeds are any different from our regular non-pie pumpkins, so I can roast them, and then maybe turning it into soup.
Yeah, I was thinking mashing up a pumpkin, making a nice pumpkin soup, or maybe some pumpkin-filled pasta.
It is a very versatile, I guess, because it's a squash, so it's quite versatile. It's just that I've never thought to cook with pumpkin. Pumpkin has always been something that you cut up, you gut, you fill with salt.
Yeah, and I guess it's funny enough because for the longest time people did eat it. It was a staple crop, It wasn't just for decoration, and now I think most people think a pumpkin is just a decoration.
Well, I think we carve them, we put them outside, they rot, and then we don't eat them.
Well, you wouldn't want to eat a rotten pumpkin that's been on the street all week.
No, of course not.
You want one of them nice clean pumpkins.
So if you're carving pumpkin and then you have your eating pumpkin.
Exactly.
I'm going to eat my pumpkin.
You always got to have your eating pumpkin.
So you have to buy at least 2 pumpkins this year. You're carving pumpkin and you're eating pumpkin.
Or if you want to be safe, you buy a pumpkin for every windowsill in your house,
Ah, yes.
You don't have much time left, don't you?
They're selling out fast. Go now. Now, can they just be like little baby pumpkins, or do they really have
little baby pumpkin.
Okay.
Well, turnips used to work, right? So I feel like a small pumpkin is kind of like a turnip, They're probably cousins.
I think so. Well, actually, I'm not sure. But if we're running out of gourds to carve, can we perhaps go with a butternut squash or an acorn squash?
Yeah. Or if you want, you could go with a spaghetti squash.
That's delicious.
I love a good spaghetti squash.
Me too. Okay, I think we're thinking about food too much here.
We may have drifted off topic once again. Into the finer eating points of pumpkins and Halloween diets. But yeah, thank you once again for joining us.
Yes, I hope that your Halloween is spooky and you get to celebrate and got those pumpkins.
Got those pumpkins, celebrate whenever you can, whether it's reading a horror story, watching a horror film, or getting together with family, as weird as that sounds these days.
Maybe distanced. Because, plague.
Alright, good night, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe.
Stay spooky!